Rome was a city that was made for 1,000 years before it burned to the ground. But when it comes to the sack of Rome in 410 AD, we're not talking about the legendary fire of 64, which was so notorious that Nero blamed it on the Christians, or even the one that happened after he kicked the bucket. We're talking about an event so shameful that the idea of the sack of Rome became a trope that was used to threaten the eternal city into submission. In fact, Rome was only saved from being sacked by Alaric and his Visigoths on 2 separate occasions, once in 395 and again in 410. This means that they had to be pretty peeved when Rome didn't keep its word. And as you'll see, Rome had a history of making deals with barbarians that went up in flames. It all started in 378 when the Goths invaded the Balkans. The Visigoths were a Germanic people who were probably living along the Vistula River in what is now Poland. But that's just a guess, because no one knows where the Goths came from. Some historians have argued that the Goths were actually Greeks from the Black Sea coast who spoke a Greek-like language, but we have no idea. What we do know is that they were in the Balkans in 378, and that's when their leader, a guy named Fritigern, took his army to the city of Adrianople and laid siege to it. Emperor Valens tried to lift the siege, but he ended up losing his entire army, including his own head. The Visigoths then pillaged their way across the Balkans, sacking cities like Philippopolis, now known as Plovdiv, and Thessalonica, modern-day Thessaloniki, before heading to Rome. They reached the gates of the city in 395, but negotiations led to a treaty in which the Goths were promised land and power in exchange for not burning the city. It was a smart move on Rome's part, because the Visigoths were in no position to sustain a lengthy siege, and they accepted the offer. But as we mentioned earlier, Rome had a bad habit of going back on her word. The treaty stipulated that the Visigoths would be allowed to settle in Pannonia, now part of Hungary and Croatia, but Emperor Theodosius I went back on his word and basically told them to get lost. In response, Alaric marched his Visigoths toward Rome. The Romans panicked and prepared for battle. They built massive walls around the city and stationed soldiers along the 25-mile-long, 16-foot-high barrier. They also built towers at regular intervals to allow for archers to do their thing and to spot any approaching enemies. But the Visigoths weren't there to engage in conventional warfare. They employed a tactic called the Roman candle, in which they would light a bunch of resin-soaked cloths and then hurl them over the top of the walls. These flaming projectiles would ignite the wooden structures within the city, causing widespread panic and destruction. And things got so out of hand that the priests had to flee to the countryside, abandoning the city and their posts. For their part, the Visigoths weren't trying to lay a siege. They were just trying to plunder the city and get the heck out of there. Alaric sent letters to the Bishop of Rome and to the Emperor, basically saying, "Yo, pay us what we're owed, or we're gonna burn your city to the ground." Unsurprisingly, the letters went unanswered. So the Visigoths did what they had threatened and sacked the city, pillaging it for 3 days before moving on to other targets. But even though the sack lasted only 3 days, the damage was done. The Visigoths stole tons of gold, silver, and jewels from churches and other buildings, and they executed anyone who got in their way. They also slaughtered the Bishop of Rome's brother, who ironically was a military officer tasked with defending the city. After finishing their rampage, the Visigoths left, and Rome was forced to pay them off again to ensure that they wouldn't return. But this wasn't the last time that Rome would be put in a precarious position. In 410, Alaric returned to the gates of Rome with a larger army than before and demanded the city be handed over without a fight. The citizens and the military governor, Stilicho, rejected his demands, but it soon became obvious that they couldn't win. In fact, the Visigoths managed to breach the city walls and began pillaging once again. Many Romans fled into the countryside, while others barricaded themselves into their homes. Those who remained outside the safety of their homes were killed or taken captive. Churches, public buildings, and private homes were ransacked, and valuable items were either stolen or destroyed. One of the most famous victims of this sack was the Bronze Gate of Rome, which had been salvaged from a previous sack of Rome in 366, and which had been melted down and reused for the port of Ibiana. This time, the Visigoths didn't leave until they had completely emptied the treasury of the Roman state. After finishing their plunder, Alaric and his men left Rome, taking their captives and loot with them. The city was left in ruins, and the people of Rome were devastated. This wasn't the end of the sacks of Rome, but it was the last time that Alaric would be involved in one. If you want to hear about the other times that Rome was sacked, stay tuned. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, check out our video on how Rome fell. Or check out this other video. Comment below with video suggestions, and don't forget to subscribe and follow our channel.